for this very, very special event that we're having. I just want to let you all know that if you're finding yourself here at the bookstore for the first time, although I notice most of you are not, please go to our website, find out about all the great things that we have coming up, because we've got a great fall ahead of us, and we'd love you to know all about it. So you can pick up one of our flyers, which will tell you about it, or go to the website. And you can also sign up at the website, and we will send you more emails than you can ever imagine. You'll just never feel lonely again. Also, one of the things that we've been doing, because we got a wonderful grant from the Knight Foundation, is we are doing a series of live streaming. So if you want to take a moment while I'm speaking to tweet out to your friends that they can watch it right now live by going to booksandbooks.com and click on the bar that says live stream, they will be able to see tonight's event as it's happening. And if, in fact, they would like to get a book, all they have to do is call the store, and we'll have it signed by Robbie after the event as well. Or they can ask a question or anything else they want to do. But I just have to say that this is a very special night for us, because Robbie Goolrick is very dear to all of us here at Books and Books. We've watched his career closely, and we celebrate each time he's released a new book. His memoir, The End of the World as You Know It, is considered to be one of the best books in the genre. Written with true courage and language that's so engaging you can get through the agony with all the ecstasy as well. It's both harrowing and uplifting. In fact, we've tracked the theme, the persistence of song, which we have found continues to be significant throughout the book. His debut novel, all of you know, A Reliable Wife, took the world by storm. It was a gigantic bestseller. It helped put my kids through, I guess it was middle school at the time. All over the nation, people were reading it. It's a favorite even today of book clubs. His second novel, Heading Out to Wonderful, we're proud to say part of it was finished in Grand Cayman, in the shadow of our store that we have on Grand Cayman Island. We were able to get a special residency that got him out of the cold of his winter landscape, where he could finish his book. It's a marvelous book as well. But now we celebrate tonight The Fall of Princes. In his third novel, he's given us a story of the excess and greed of the 80s. But unlike any of the 80s writers we know, some reviewers have compared him to Bret Easton Ellis because of the time period. But this book is not a satire like American Psycho. It's a heartfelt ode to those times and seems a thinly veiled autobiography of his own career as an ad man. He was one of the original madmen. Maybe not original, but he was a madman. It's a morality tale about falling hard and still rising and reinventing oneself. Although we hate the fact that his main character works as a bookseller at Barnes & Noble, we're honored that he chose such a noble profession in order for that character to redeem himself. The book is really a lot of fun to read. It's like a fairy tale for adults. And in the hands of the great Robert Goolrick, the story takes on a razor-sharp and poignant rhythm. His words create a symphony of chapters that structurally mimic the rise and fall of his characters with seductive, darkly comic, and intoxicating language. Please, please give a very warm, warm Books and Books welcome to the great Robbie Goolrick. You don't need this because you're wired.
I'm wired. The Fall of Princes is not just about one man, it's about the explosion into life and the sudden extinguishing of a decade, the 80s, through which many of us lived, and those of us who lived in New York experienced probably what was the greatest party on earth, and then the sudden end of that party with the impact of AIDS. And this is told through the story of one man and his friends. The one man may or may not be named Rooney. Sometimes he's called Rooney, and sometimes he tells us that that's not his name at all. So he's not the most reliable narrator in the world. But I think the progress of his story is one in which he is seeking. He tells us in the beginning that he's not a very nice person. And I think the progress of the novel is one in which he is yearning and hoping and stretching towards being a better person than he was. And that is also true of the decade in which he lived. This chapter is called The 11-Foot Hooker Walks the Walk. And it's about after he has fallen from grace and lost all of his worldly possessions and returned to the original walk-up apartment in which he first came to New York, and the denizens of the street on which he lives, 35th Street. This is the story. The street was not a solid thing. It was fluid as a river, an undulation of asphalt and cement, swarming with rats and crackheads and hookers. You could feel the waves in your body. Nothing was stable or solid. All was moving, hawking, fighting, stealing. There were 2 hotels on the street where I lived and 4 parking garages, so the din was unbearable at any hour. In the day, there was an incessant honking of horns since, because of the parking garages, traffic crept along, often not moving a foot from light to light. And at night, the monster garbage trucks roared their omnivorous way down the block at a creeping pace, stopping every 10 yards to hoist mountains of garbage into their yawning, straining maws. I learned that it was safer when walking home drunk from the bars to walk in the middle of the street. At 2 in the morning, there was little traffic, and in the street, it was more of an effort to pull you into a doorway and put a knife to your throat, which is how I got to know the hookers. 35th Street was a united nation of hookers. Women of every ethnic and cultural and sexual variety walked the streets, usually down the center, scattering when a car raced past, then returning to their languid stroll on the asphalt. They carried tiny purses. They sucked on lollipops. There was one year when they all strangely sucked on baby pacifiers. They would yell at passing cars, show lewd body parts, make irresistible offers to tail lights racing home to New Jersey. Some cars crept down the street on the prowl, and the hookers would walk alongside them, the creeping cars making deals with the skill of a Wall Street trader selling junk bonds. And often the car would stop and the girl would get in, twitching her behind in victory for the other girls to see. And the car would speed off into the dark, only to deliver the hooker back to the flock half an hour later. One girl stood head and shoulders above the rest, literally. She must have been 6'4", in addition to which she wore cork platform shoes with the highest heels I've ever seen, and she was not petite. She was gargantuan, vast, enormous. She was probably 19 and still had the loveliness of the child. I would walk past her and she would call out in a soft voice, "Don't you want to have a really good time? Let Holly show you a really, really good time." I didn't acknowledge her entreaties, although every now and then it would occur to me that, hell yes, I actually would like to have a really good time. I would like to have a good time if I had the money to have a really, really good time. Holly was magnificent in every way. On chilly nights, she wore a short coat of fake fur, pink, which did nothing to keep her long legs warm, and you could tell she was cold, must have been. But in the face of this or any other vicissitude, Holly didn't show discomfort. She walked like she was strolling on a summer's night on Worth Avenue in Palm Beach, Florida. She was the tree topper on the Christmas tree of 35th Street hookers. One night, after massive numbers of cocktails at P.J. Clark's with Finelli, who still called, he and I stood in a drunken embrace on the street, weeping over my ill fortune, and then we parted, him in a cab uptown, me downtown on foot since I was completely broke. When I put my hand in my jacket pocket, I felt and then pulled out 5 $100 bills that Finelli had slipped in while we were weeping over the injustice of life in general and our deep and abiding affection for each other in particular. I felt like the Emperor of Ethiopia. I hadn't had that much cash on me in months. I wept at his kindness and subtlety and hailed a taxi, an actual yellow cab. I was too drunk to say my full address, so I had him let me off on the corner of 5th and walked down 35th Street of muggings and broken dreams, although it wasn't walking in the normal sense by any means. Holly called out and something struck. I had $500 and I did want to have a really, really good time. I staggered toward her and realized up close that Holly was a man in drag. A boy, actually, a tall boy. Well, I thought, so what? Before I could speak, however, I fell flat on my face. Flat, in the middle of the street. Felt the crunch of blood as blood gushed from my nose. "Oh, baby," said Holly, towering over me, at least 11 feet tall. Babies had one too many. She hoisted me from the street like a rag doll, 185 pounds of dead weight, and she held me upright. For a fleeting moment, I thought of the squalor of my apartment, the dishes in the sink from last week's attempt at cooking, the dirty sheets and socks, the rats. And then I thought, oh, what the hell, she's a $50 hooker. She's seen it all. I let her drag me to my apartment's building street door, on which the lock was broken, and somehow we made it up the 5 flights of stairs to my apartment. She took one look inside and said, "Baby, what explosion happened here?" Everything Holly said had an exclamation point after it, as though she had just discovered a new planet or a new law of thermodynamics. "Baby, the kitchen. Where's the bathroom? Do you have any cotton balls?" The idea that I would have a cotton ball is something kind of like the idea of Marie Antoinette having blue jeans. Not likely. "What a dump! A nice young man like you. Why do you live here amidst this ruination?" Holly's way of speaking, like Holly herself, was wholly manufactured out of old movies and romance magazines. Meanwhile, she was rushing around stuffing toilet paper up my nose to stanch the bleeding, wiping my face with a clean wash rag she miraculously found getting me out of my shirt. "My God, what a stomach!" she exclaimed. I did 350 sit-ups a day to maintain a vestige of what the trainer had worked so hard to create. My body, once a work of art, was collapsing, atrophying, but I did what I could. Push-ups, 150. It passed the time, of which there was an infinite amount, even given the amount of time I spent reading Proust, and it made me feel that, when the call came, this soldier would be ready to answer. Not that any calls came, except from Mr. McDermott and Mrs. Willoughby of their respective collection agencies, and others of their ilk, but I kept up the habit. Sometimes I put them on speakerphone and did sit-ups while they told me of all the dire things that were about to happen to me. I didn't mind talking to them. They were sort of pleasant, actually. Holly was the first real person who had been in my apartment in months. Not that Holly was a real person, as I had heretofore understood the term. Holly was an imagined creation from the ground up, not real in any way, in the strictest sense. The whole point of being Holly, I suppose, was to outsmart reality, to become something wholly other. I finally stopped bleeding. Holly helped me to the bed, first straightening the sheets and plumping the pillows. I offered her one of Finelli's crisp hundreds, 20% of my entire worldly goods, and she said, "What do I look like, a nurse? Keep your money, baby. What's your name, anyway?" I mumbled a response. "That your real name?" "It's what people call me." "You really need a cleaning woman or something. A mammy," she said. Man was not meant to live like this. I passed out, and when I woke up in the dead of night, bleeding again all over my pillow, Holly was gone, and the apartment was as clean as my apartment was ever going to get. Dirty shirts in the hamper, shoes put away, dishes done, a big lipstick kiss on the bathroom mirror. The bloodied shirt was gone. I looked out the window, and there she was, strolling under the sputtering streetlights in the middle of the street, swinging her baby doll purse, also pink, with rhinestones. A nurse, a hooker, a good Samaritan, a drag queen. I didn't see Holly for several nights, but when I did, I walked up to her to thank her for her ministrations. She shrieked as though she had just seen her long-lost father. "Baby, hold on a sec, I have something for you." She ran off to some secret cubbyhole she kept somewhere on the street and returned with a bag from Bergdorf's and a box with the familiar ribbon around it in which there was a pristine, brand-new Sea Island shirt exactly my size. "I couldn't get the blood out of the old one. I scrubbed and scrubbed. Look at these hands. So I bought you one I thought you would like. You can always take it back for another one if you don't like it, I mean." "Holly," I said, "it's too much. You shouldn't. You don't understand a thing, do you? Money means nothing to us girls, to me at least. I'm like a walking bank. They stick it in and out comes money, and it never stops. She opened her purse to show me the wads of balled up cash. It's virtually endless. I'm a human ATM machine, open 24 hours a day. It was a beautiful shirt, and it had been so long since I had anything new. I almost wept. I thanked her, the thanks seeming paltry and inadequate besides her generous gesture, and then the thought of Holly and Bergdorf's hit me, the unlikelihood of it all, of any mercantile exchange happening between Holly and one of the sad, splendid salesmen. Honey, when I die, just lay me out at Bergdorf's. Everything is so beautiful there. I just put on my Chanel suit, and yes, I have a Chanel suit. I used to have this, boyfriend, well, and a wistful look crossed her face, and she said with dignity, well, I used to have a boyfriend, and he was so sweet to me, so sweet, and then, well, there's always a then, isn't there? Nothing bad could ever happen to you at Bergdorf's. Well, actually, my friend Larice had something bad happen to her, but that was only because she had a Halston dress under her coat at the time, and that was bad. But I could never do a thing like that. I bought this shirt with money I earned with my charm and beauty, and now it's yours. That's so kind. Could we be friends? I don't have any gentleman friends, and maybe I could come up to your apartment every now and then and warm up. Of course, anytime. I'm smart. I know a lot of stuff. I'm just not educated. You'll like it, and I won't bother you if you don't want to be bothered, but I will come. And she did. She did come to my apartment, not often at first, but within a month she made an almost nightly visit to see how I was, to describe her lewd and peculiar adventures. I never realized you could do so many extraordinary things in the front seat of a car parked on a dark, out-of-the-way street. Sometimes the men would take her to the Hotel Carter, but not often. Usually the encounter was over in 15 minutes or less, and the men would drop her where they found her, and she would follow their taillights as they raced home to safety in New Jersey. There is such need in the world. It is constant and never changing. It is eternal, and it is worth far more than $50 to find some respite from the hunger and the wanting and the need, so deep it is. We grow engorged and enraged with need, and the relief we find with people like Holly is at best temporary, because the suffering need is there again in the morning, ravenous and all-consuming. And Holly was there to take it on, the bodies and the pricks and the grasping, hurried hands, the zipper and the smell and the taste, to make the hunger go away for a minute or two, like a snack before dinner. And all she asked was $50 and safe return to her place on the street. The need died in me when I lost my job, my way, lost my place in the world, and the romance division of my personal enterprise shut its doors forever, and no one has ever gotten in again. My life is my fault. I made it. They did the best they could. Carmela once asked me, "What is it you really want?" I shouted at her, "I want to be completely loved and completely left alone." But life has taught me in the harshest ways that such a thing is not possible, and so I ended up getting the latter, no matter how much I might need or want the former. Poor Carmela, such a lovely girl, the sweetheart of my youth. So I let Holly in for a minute, for a time in my life when there was nothing else, and she would show up, always breathless with news of her adventures, and we would sit and drink scotch and talk into the night, sometimes with only the light from the television to pierce the darkness. We would drink scotch and watch almost naked men and women dance ineptly on cable television. The hostess of the show, Robin Bird, would introduce these dancers as though each were the second coming of Christ, and she would actually interview these morons after they had jerked and slithered their way through 2 minutes of disco dancing, and they would tout their careers in porn films. I was an invalid in her eyes, and she took care of me like a man dying of cancer, always cleaning, straightening, putting my life back on some kind of recognizably human track. I had lost all bearings. There was one guy on the TV show, a swarthy Italian guy, Gino or Claudio or something, oiled, massive legs, hairy chest, and huge pecs, who was so ripped and built he could barely move, let alone do anything that a sane person would call dancing. He always stopped Holly dead in her tracks, and she would watch his every awkward move with fascination. He was on all the time. Apparently he did like a porno movie almost every week and always had some product to push. Holly was transfixed every time. He looks exactly like my boyfriend, my one true love, she said one night. That's all, my one true time of happiness before I was just another bereft hooker on the street. I had a place then. I had somebody. Him. Well, not him, but somebody who looked just like him. Sort of, if you squint your eyes and don't listen to that disgusting voice. We both had somebody once, I said. I haven't been like this forever. Neither have I. I was with somebody. A couple, I think they call it. His name was George, Yorgos, Greek. He worked on the printing presses at the New York Times. I was 16, almost 17. I was a boy then. Just a runaway boy from Cleveland. And George was 33, and he took me in, and man, did he love me. And I guess I loved him back. I was on my own since 14. What did I know about love, about anything? When my ride left me off in New York after hitchhiking for 5 days, I slept on a bench behind the New York Public Library. I thought it was Central Park. Then I stood on the street corner, and I got in the first car that stopped for me, and I did that for 2 years. And one night the car that stopped was George. And I was tired of that life, and well, I guess he was just a lucky one, but fate. But I felt for him. In my deepest heart, I had feelings for him, and I guess that's love, right? When you feel it, you know it. It's like stepping off a cliff. It was all I could think to say. Can you turn off the TV? I can't watch this and tell the story at the same time. Freaks me out. I turned it off, and the apartment went from blue to gold as the lights from the streetlight flooded in. Holly moved ghost-like and golden around the room, sipping her scotch. I had never felt so weird in my life. Holly's eyes were moist as though she were about to cry, and they glistened in the golden light of the room. I'm going to tell you this once, and then you're not going to say anything, and we're never going to talk about it again, okay? Deal? Cross my heart. Okay, well, anyway. Holly had dropped her usual exclamatory way of talking and spoke from a softer, more vulnerable place, from the heart, from her childish heart, which suddenly seemed in that odd light and in the deep part of night like a lovely thing. I kept my mouth shut, as I was told. He wanted us to live together. He got an apartment in Brooklyn in a Greek neighborhood, but it was very conservative, and he didn't want his neighbors to know he was living with a boy, so I shaved my legs and put on a blouse and skirt he bought me. He bought me a lot of clothes. And I was a girl, and I grew my hair long, and I was pretty, really pretty. It was like I'd been waiting all my life to be somebody's girl. I even got a job as a fitting model for Oscar, and I started taking hormone shots. God, it's hot in here. As she talked, she began to remove her clothes piece by piece, and I didn't object until finally she was naked in her heels, and I saw the whole thing, the deal, what it was like to be Holly underneath all of her clothes. She made no mention of it. I guess whores are used to taking their clothes off. It was both bizarre and beautiful in its way. Maybe a trick of the light, the other, the entirely other. He found a doctor. He arranged everything. I loved having breasts. He liked big ones, so he found a plastic surgeon and bought the finest pair on the East Coast, and things were so nice for a while, so nice. He was a real man. He was a fierce kisser. It was like being devoured by some wild beast, heaven. Her mascara was starting to run down her face, and she looked, even in the golden light, like she was 1,000,000 years old. He was very traditional. He wanted to get married, which meant I had to have the operation. He saved his money, and he arranged it all with Dr. Money at Johns Hopkins, and he eventually put me on a Greyhound bus for Baltimore with $10,000 in my little purse. But I met these divine sailors in the bus station, and we went for a drink. And one thing led to another, and I woke up a month later in the $20 a night flea bag with nothing left. The fleet had sailed. No money, no operation, still a boy. I had to work the street to get enough money to get back to Brooklyn. And when I got there, he took one look, and he beat the living hell out of me, and he threw me out on the street where he found me. She downed her scotch, put on her clothes piece by piece. End of story. I'll never fall in love again. Don't get up. I can let myself out. Not one word, not one. That was the deal. I don't need your pity. God, my makeup is a mess. I'll just be a jiffy, and then I'll go back into the fray. She went into the bathroom and closed the door. When she emerged, Her makeup restored, her face was like a hard mask, and she was ready for the rest of her night. I watched her for a long time, walking in the middle of the street, watched as she got into a car and sped off, and was still watching, anxious as a father on prom night, as the car returned her to a perch. I felt something for her. It wasn't desire, and it wasn't pity. It was affection, easy and welcomed, and a kind of respect. We became friends. Who else did we have? We would go to the movies in the afternoon. Holly would show up with a bottle of Cristal, ice cold, and we would drink and laugh until everything was blanked out and meaningless. We went to a party given by one of Holly's friends at a loft downtown and got drunk and watched a fat man lip-sync the entire Barbra Streisand songbook, or so it seemed. He wore a red sequin dress and held a flashlight beneath his chin to illuminate his face in the darkness of the room. Holly got out the fabled Chanel suit from the lockers at Penn Station where she kept her wardrobe, and we went to Bergdorf Goodman. The family that owned the store lived in an apartment on the top floor, and Holly and I agreed that was pretty close to our idea of heaven. Holly looked like any young Park Avenue wife. We looked, in fact, like a happy, well-to-do couple, which for that afternoon, exploring every floor of the store, trying things on, being haughty with the salespeople, we were. We didn't care if we looked odd on the street. We took care of each other in the way friends do, and that was good enough for us for a time. The bitter cold began to break up into pieces like ice in a river and dissolve into clear and sunny days, chilly at night. Easter was coming. Holly continued to visit almost every night, and one night even chastely sleeping for 2 hours beside me in my bed on top of the covers before rushing out into the night. The night before Palm Sunday, Holly showed up breathless at the door and asked me to lunch the next day at a place in the village I had never heard of called the Ninth Circle. They have great burgers, she said, and a great jukebox and treats for the eyes and ears. 1 o'clock. Be sharp. Something has happened, something wonderful. I have a great piece of news to tell you, just great. The next day was warm, the first really warm day. Easter was late that year, I guess, but Palm Sunday was warm, and I bathed for church and shaved carefully and put on a seersucker suit and the shirt Holly had given me. It was lavender with white pinstripes and a white collar and cuffs. I wore it with a rose-colored tie from the Tie Museum in my closet. I never wore them anymore, no reason. I looked like an Easter egg. That Palm Sunday church seemed to go on forever, and I kept checking my watch. I was the only person in the seersucker suit. The rest of the men were in banker blue or gray, pinstripes, and I sat off to the side so that no one would touch or speak to me. When the collection plate came around, I had nothing to give, so I pretended to pray until it passed me by. As soon as I had taken communion, the body and the blood, I raced from the church and caught the train down to the village, where I found, after some difficulty, the Ninth Circle. It was exactly 1 o'clock. I pulled open the metal door and walked, palm frond in hand, into the middle of an aggressively dark and seedy leather bar, in my seersucker suit. It was like when worlds collide, except that I was the only inhabitant on my planet. The rest of them were all dressed in various forms of black leather, all kinds of stuff I'd never seen before, straps and chaps and harnesses and black leather jeans with no backs on them, cod pieces, a museum of a particular fetish that didn't happen to be mine. They stared at me, facial hair bristling. They stared hard for a long time. Seersucker. Jesus Christ. The crowded bar seemed to stretch endlessly into the dark back room where there were tables covered in red checkered linoleum and a few lost leather souls downing their Budweisers and eating the much advertised burgers. I made my way through the long gauntlet of black leather and sat at one of the tables. No Holly. She didn't show up for another 45 excruciating minutes, and when she did, she looked like hell. Today she was a boy. Hair tied back, wearing jeans and loafers and a t-shirt that had a line that went from nipple to nipple under which it said, "You must be this tall to ride this ride." No makeup, at least only the ghost-like smear of last night's face. Holly needed a shave. "Sorry," she said. "Kell night. I rushed out of the house like a madwoman. I didn't want to keep you waiting." I didn't point out that she had, in fact, already kept me waiting for almost an hour. "Oh, you look so handsome. The greatest thing has happened, the greatest thing ever. Holly, tell me." "I'm in love. I've fallen in love with a real man." "Holly, that's great. I'm so happy for you. Who's the guy?" There was an awkward pause while Holly let me think it over just long enough that I knew the answer before she spoke. "You." The color must have drained from my face because Holly took my hands just for a second, then quickly withdrew and put her hands back in my lap. She spoke quietly without affectation and a great tenderness of feeling. She looked down at the table as she spoke, never looking at me until the end. "I'm telling you this because, like, to me at least, the greatest sin is to love somebody and not tell them. That's the greatest sin." Then she looked into my eyes and I saw how deep and gentle was the love she was speaking of. Because then, when the person you love walks down the street, or walks into a meeting or a room full of strangers, they don't know that somebody loves them. And that can make all the difference in, like, a person's confidence and stuff, you know? I know nothing will happen when I tell you I love you. There's no way. You're regular. I'm well, whatever I am. I'm not regular. I'm not telling you because of that. I'm just telling you so that when you hail a cab or answer the phone, when you walk into a room full of strangers, you'll know that there is somebody in the world who loves you and who will always love you wherever you go, whatever happens, until the end of time. Don't ever forget that. Promise you will never forget that you are loved. She crossed her heart and touched one finger to my lips, and then, as quickly as she had come, she was gone. And I wept. In the middle of all the swarthy, muscled leather men, with their straps and bristling facial hair, and their collars and their chaps, I sat at the grimy table in the seedy leather bar on West 10th Street, and I wept until I couldn't cry anymore. And then, with what little dignity I had, I left. I got up to go. I noticed that one of the patrons, I don't know who, had put a glass of beer in front of me while I was crying my guts out, and I looked around for who to thank, but nobody looked at me, so I took a sip of the beer, and then I left the Ninth Circle and walked through the gorgeous spring day, all the way back to Hubble Hall, all the way back to 35th Street, all the way to whatever was going to happen for the rest of my life. Loved, 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 forever, forever, forever. And I never saw Holly again. She never came back to 35th Street to rule the street the way she had every night for years. For months I asked the other girls about her, but they didn't know where she'd gone or wouldn't say. I hung around the lockers at Penn Station where she kept her clothes, but she never showed up, leaving me alone, leaving me completely alone, but also completely loved, as I had once asked so many years before. I was also left with no way to thank her, as though thanks were ever enough. Thank you. Questions?
That was great. Just like we were there.
Thank you.
Was the
Yes.
what beginning of the reading, was that after you had lost your job in advertising? I haven't read the book yet.
You're saying as though it's actually me. So it's actually autobiographical.
The inspiration.
Yes, it's after he's lost his job and lost everything.
What chapter is that in the book?
It's very near the end. It's very near the end. The progress of the book is that he starts out as a sort of haughty and oversexed, over-moneyed, overpowered young Wall Street broker. and he ends up, as Mitch said, as a bookseller at Barnes & Noble. And the reason I chose, it's a book about how you redeem your life when your life is beyond redemption. And I chose bookselling because I think of it as the most honorable profession in America. And I think booksellers are true heroes. And I wanted him to find something that was simple, ordinary and simple, yet completely filled with the kind of honor and dignity. And that's what he does. My books tend to be about redemption, ways of finding redemption. Reliable Wife is about good things happening to bad people. Heading Out to Wonderful is about bad things happening to good people. And this book is sort of about the disasters that you can wreak on your own life and nevertheless find some way to rebuild a life that you can live in. A smaller life, a smaller, more comfortable life.
I have a question. Are those stories being played out right now on Wall Street?
It's all happening again. There's one story in the book about a kid who sleeps in the boiler room and works himself to death. And that story was in the New York Times about 8 months ago. It happened in some banking firm. Some kid who refused to go home because he was afraid to miss a deal. And so he just moved lock, stock, and barrel into the boiler room and changed his clothes there every morning. And nobody knew that he was living there. And his heart exploded. He was 23 or 24. So it's all happening all over again. I don't know that the kind of excess that happened in the 80s with cars and boats and drugs and all that could happen again, because in the 80s, when the quitting whistle blew, you got to disconnect yourself. You got to unplug. Whereas now, nobody is ever unplugged. You're never off the meter. And so I don't think that young people today have time for the kind of wretched excess that we had time for. You know, they can't stay up all night if they have to take a call at 2 in the morning.
And why did you choose that passage in particular?
Excuse me?
Why did you choose that part to read in particular?
Why? Because I think it contains the part of it contains the part of the book that I think moves me the most, and it actually happened to me. That somebody said to me, some very inappropriate person said to me, "I love you," and said that the greatest sin was to love somebody and not tell them. And I think that's an incredibly important thought to keep in your mind as you go through life. And something that I have said over and over and over to myself and to other people, and it's something I try to remember in my own life. So you should remember it in your life.
Of course.
Any other questions? Well, if not, Robbie, thank you so
Thank you
much
all.
for such a great evening. Now, I also want to let all of you know that this is only a kind of preview performance, because Robbie Goolrick will be back for the Miami Book Fair.
Yes, indeed.
So he'll be appearing at the Book Fair on the weekend of November 21st and 22nd. So
And I'll read you a part all about sex and drugs now.
again, and thank you all for watching at home. And Robbie will be here signing copies of his book as well. Thank you again. Another hand for Robert Goolrick.